Ever wondered how the largest empire in history, the one on which the sun never set, just faded away? We often picture dramatic battles and declarations of independence, but the real story is quieter, and it all comes down to money. The British Empire didn't collapse in a blaze of glory. It slowly bled out financially. Let's rewind. How did a small island nation build a global empire in the first place? It was a masterful combination of trade, debt, and sea power. Britain pioneered a system of government debt, the national debt, which sounds bad, but it was revolutionary. It allowed them to fund a navy that was second to none. This Royal Navy protected trade routes, which brought in immense wealth, which in turn helped pay for the navy and service the debt. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of power. They weren't just conquering lands. They were building a global financial network with London at its very center. The pound sterling was the world's currency, as dominant as the US dollar is today. But running an empire is expensive. Really expensive. Every colonial war, every naval ship, every administrator sent to a distant corner of the globe added to the bill. For a long time, the profits from trade and colonies covered the costs, and then some. The system worked. Britain could afford to police the world's oceans and maintain its vast territories. This was the era of Pax Britannica, a British-enforced global peace that was, of course, very good for British business. But the costs were always there, accumulating in the background, a ticking financial time bomb. A crucial piece of this financial puzzle was the gold standard. This meant that every pound sterling in circulation was backed by a real, physical amount of gold held in the Bank of England's vaults. This gave the pound its rock-solid credibility. Other countries trusted it because they knew they could, in theory, exchange their pounds for gold. This stability was the bedrock of Britain's financial leadership. But it also created a major vulnerability. If Britain ever spent more than it had in its gold reserves, the whole system could come crashing down. It was a financial straitjacket. It enforced discipline, but it also limited their ability to respond to a massive crisis. And then came the crisis to end all crises. World War I. This wasn't a small colonial skirmish. It was total industrial warfare on an unimaginable scale. The cost was astronomical. Britain had to finance not only its own war effort, but also help fund its allies. To do this, they had to print money and borrow on a massive scale, shattering the discipline of the gold standard. The national debt, which had been manageable for a century, absolutely exploded. It went from about 25% of GDP before the war to over 130% after. The country liquidated its overseas investments, sold off assets, and borrowed heavily, especially from the United States. The financial foundation of the empire was cracking under the strain. After the war, Britain was a shadow of its former self financially. They tried to go back to the gold standard in 1925 to reclaim their old prestige, but it was a disaster. The pound was overvalued, crippling British exports and leading to economic hardship at home. The Great Depression was the final nail in the coffin. In 1931, Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard for good. This was a monumental moment. It was an open admission to the world that the pound was no longer the unshakable currency it once was. Its global influence began to wane. Countries started holding their reserves in other currencies, primarily the US dollar. The financial scepter was passing. And as Britain's financial power faded, America's star was rising. The US had emerged from both world wars as the world's great creditor nation. While Europe was in ruins and in debt, America was a manufacturing powerhouse with deep pockets. The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 sealed the deal. It established a new global financial order with the US dollar, backed by gold, at its center. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were created. Both headquartered in Washington, D.C., London was officially replaced by New York as the financial capital of the world. America now had the economic might to project global power in a way Britain no longer could. So why does this matter? Because history shows us that empires often end with a whimper, not a bang. They die in the accounting ledgers before they lose their last battle. Maintaining a global military presence, administering vast territories, and fighting wars costs a fortune. When a nation can no longer afford the price of empire, its decline is inevitable. Military defeat might be the final visible act, but the fatal wound is almost always financial exhaustion. The British couldn't afford their navy, their overseas bases, their colonial administration anymore. Independence movements grew stronger precisely when Britain was at its weakest and least able to afford the cost of suppressing them. The story of the British Empire's decline is a powerful lesson. It wasn't about a single lost war or a revolutionary uprising. It was a slow, painful process of financial bleeding that spanned decades. The costs of 2 world wars drained the treasury. The pound lost its global dominance, and a new financial power, the United States, rose to take its place. The empire on which the sun never set finally went dark, not because of invading armies but because the bills came due, and the bank was empty. Thanks for watching. If you found this look at history interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. See you in the next one.